The autumn morning cast long shadows through the towering windows of the Hamilton County Courthouse, where justice and heartbreak walked hand in hand down marble corridors that had witnessed thousands of family tragedies. Judge Maria Rodriguez adjusted her black robes as she entered courtroom 4B, her 23 years on the bench having taught her that child custody cases were often the most brutal battlegrounds in the entire legal system. Today would prove no exception. The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the wood-paneled chamber like a gunshot, instantly silencing the nervous whispers that had filled the air. Sarah Chun sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, her olive complexion pale with stress, dark circles under her eyes, telling the story of countless sleepless nights spent preparing for this moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a tissue box, the white knuckles betraying the calm facade she desperately tried to maintain. At 32, Sarah had the tired look of a woman who had aged years in just months. Her once bright nursing scrubs replaced today by a conservative navy suit that seemed to swallow her diminished frame. Her attorney, Rebecca Williams, no relation to the Derek Williams who would soon become central to this case, spread a collection of damning photographs across the mahogany table with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. Each image told a story of alleged neglect: empty beer bottles scattered on coffee tables, holes punched in drywall, overflowing ashtrays that painted Michael as an unstable drunk. Rebecca, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, had built her reputation on winning custody cases for desperate mothers. Her closing rate was impressive, her methods sometimes questionable, but her dedication to her clients was absolute. Across the narrow aisle, it might as well have been an ocean, Michael Chun sat with the stillness of a man who had learned to control his emotions through years of physical labor and recent months of legal torment. His calloused construction, workers' hands, permanently stained with grout and concrete dust, lay folded on the defendant's table like weathered tools waiting to be used. At 35, Michael still carried the broad shoulders and muscled frame of someone who had spent 15 years building other people's dreams, but his brown eyes held a defeat that no amount of physical strength could overcome. The unemployment that had started this entire nightmare showed in the slightly too loose collar of his only good shirt and the way he kept checking a watch that no longer marked time toward a job site. His attorney, David Park, was a public defender, with kind eyes and an overloaded case schedule, but he believed in Michael's innocence with the fervor of a man who had seen too many good fathers destroyed by false allegations. David whispered urgent strategies in Michael's ear, his voice barely audible, but his commitment evident in the way he leaned forward, treating this case like it was the most important one he'd ever handled. Because for the Chun family, it absolutely was. "Your Honor," Rebecca Williams began, her voice carrying the theatrical weight of practiced courtroom drama. "My client Sarah Chun stands before you today not as a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge, but as a terrified mother, fighting to protect her 3-year-old daughter from an increasingly violent and unstable father." She gestured toward the photographs with the flourish of a prosecutor presenting murder weapons. Michael Chun has become a powder keg of rage since losing his construction job 6 months ago. He drinks heavily, destroys property in fits of anger, and has created an environment of fear that no child should ever experience. The words hung in the air like poisonous smoke, each accusation designed to paint Michael as a monster lurking in his own home. Sarah's family members crowded into the gallery behind her, nodded solemnly as if bearing witness to an obvious truth. Her mother, Rosa Delgado, dabbed her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, while her younger sister Maria shot venomous glances across the aisle at Michael's much smaller support group. David Park rose with the measured calm of a man who knew the system was stacked against his client, but refused to surrender without a fight. "These are fabricated lies, Your Honor. designed to steal a loving father's fundamental right to raise his own daughter. He countered, his voice steady but passionate. Sarah Chun has constructed an elaborate fiction to gain advantage in divorce proceedings and child support negotiations. Michael Chun may be unemployed, but he has never raised a hand to his daughter or created any environment of danger. These photographs could have been staged, these allegations manufactured. Judge Rodriguez, a woman whose weathered face had seen every form of human deception and genuine suffering, raised her hand to silence both attorneys. At 58, she had the wisdom to know that the truth in custody cases rarely lay where the loudest accusations pointed. Her dark eyes swept the courtroom, taking in the family members who had chosen sides like opposing armies, the court reporters whose fingers flew across their machines, capturing every word that might determine a child's future, and the empty witness chair where 3-year-old Emma Chun would soon sit. I want to make something absolutely clear to everyone in this courtroom, Judge Rodriguez announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades separating truth from manipulation. This case is not about your anger toward each other, your hurt feelings from a failed marriage, or your desire for revenge. This case is about the best interests of a 3-year-old child who deserves parents who put her welfare above their own emotional wounds. The suffocating tension in the courtroom seemed to press down on everyone present like a physical weight. Court clerks shuffled papers nervously. The stenographer's machine clicked steadily, and somewhere in the distance, the sounds of the busy courthouse continued, other families fighting their own battles, other children's futures hanging in the balance of adult decisions and judicial wisdom. At the center of this legal storm sat a small empty chair with a booster seat, waiting for the tiny witness whose innocent words would soon shatter every assumption, reveal every hidden truth, and transform this bitter custody battle into something nobody in that courtroom could possibly have anticipated. The soft afternoon light filtering through the sheer curtains of Dr. Lisa Martinez's child psychology office created dancing shadows on the walls, a gentle environment carefully designed to make traumatized children feel safe enough to share their deepest fears. Dr. Martinez, a woman in her early 40s with kind brown eyes and graying temples, had spent the last 15 years specializing in cases where children became unwilling witnesses in adult conflicts. Her office looked more like a magical playroom than a clinical space. Colorful building blocks scattered across a plush carpet, stuffed animals of every size and species arranged on low shelves, and child-sized furniture that made little visitors feel like giants in their own special world. 3-year-old Emma Chun knelt on the soft carpet, her tiny fingers gripping a red crayon with the intense concentration only children possess when creating their masterpieces. Her dark hair fell in gentle waves around her face, and she wore a purple sweater with a smiling unicorn, a stark contrast to the serious expression that seemed permanently etched on her young features. For a child who should have been carefree and giggling, Emma carried herself with an unusual gravity that broke Dr. Martinez's heart every time she witnessed it. Tomorrow, we're going to visit a big room with a nice lady in a black dress, Dr. Martinez explained gently, settling herself cross-legged on the carpet beside Emma. She had learned never to use words like courtroom, judge, or testimony. With children this young, such adult concepts only created more anxiety in minds already struggling to process the chaos of their fractured families. Instead, she painted pictures with words that felt safe and manageable to a 3-year-old's understanding. Emma looked up from her coloring, those enormous brown eyes that seemed to hold far too much sadness for someone who had barely learned to tie her shoes. "Will Mommy be there?" she whispered, her voice carrying the uncertainty of a child who had learned that the adults in her life didn't always keep their promises. The question revealed so much about Emma's current reality, a world where even her mother's presence couldn't be guaranteed, where stability had become a luxury she couldn't count on. "Yes, sweetheart, and Daddy too," Dr. Martinez replied softly, watching Emma's face for any reaction that might provide insight into the child's true feelings about her parents. Emma's expression remained carefully neutral, but her small hand moved to clutch the stuffed elephant she had named Peanuts, a telltale sign that she was processing emotional information too complex for her young mind to fully understand. Outside the office, Sarah Chun paced the carpeted hallway like a caged animal, her nursing shoes squeaking softly against the polished floors. Her iPhone buzzed incessantly in her trembling hands, each notification making her jump as if she'd been struck by lightning. The messages were all from Derek Williams, and each one sent ice through her veins. "Don't even think about mentioning me in court. You know what happens if you mess this up? That kid better keep her mouth shut about things that don't concern the court." Sarah's fingers flew across the screen, deleting each threatening text as quickly as it arrived, but she couldn't delete the fear that had taken permanent residence in her chest. Derek's presence in her life had started as a romance, a charming man who swept her off her feet during the loneliest period following her separation from Michael. But charm had quickly morphed into control, romance into manipulation, and love into a prison she couldn't figure out how to escape. His German shepherd, Kaiser, was an extension of Derek's own aggressive nature, a 90-pound weapon that Derek wielded through intimidation and barely controlled violence. Sarah had watched in horror as Kaiser terrorized Emma, snapping and snarling whenever the toddler made any sound that disturbed Derek's increasingly frequent visits. Meanwhile, 15 miles across town in his sparse studio apartment, Michael Chun sat on his second-hand couch, staring at his phone screen, which displayed dozens of photos of Emma from happier times. Pictures of father-daughter breakfast adventures, trips to the playground where Emma's laughter had filled the air like music, bedtime stories where she would fall asleep, curled against his chest. The unemployment that had stripped away his identity as a provider had also stolen these precious moments, reducing his relationship with his daughter to supervised visits and legal battles that drained his meager savings faster than he could replenish them. Michael's calloused fingers swiped through image after image, Emma's first steps, which she had taken toward him. Her second birthday party, where she had insisted on sharing her cake with Daddy first. Last Christmas morning, when she had squealed with delight at the dollhouse he had built with his own hands. Each photograph was a knife twist of memory, a reminder of the bond he was fighting desperately to preserve against accusations he couldn't understand and evidence he couldn't explain. That night, the darkness brought no peace to the Chun household. Emma woke up screaming at 2:17 a.m., her small body drenched in sweat and shaking from another nightmare that had become as regular as her bedtime routine. Her grandmother Rosa, who had moved in to help Sarah during the custody battle, rushed to Emma's bedside with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had soothed frightened children for over 6 decades. "¿Qué pasó, mi niña?" Rosa whispered. In Spanish, gathering Emma into her arms and feeling the child's racing heartbeat against her chest. Emma's nightmare-induced sobs gradually subsided, but when Rosa asked about the scary dreams, Emma would only bury her face deeper into her grandmother's shoulder and whisper, "The scary doggy, abuela. The scary doggy is mad again." Rosa's weathered. Hands stroked Emma's hair as questions swirled in her mind. She had never seen any dog at Sarah's apartment, never heard Emma mention any pets or animals that might explain these recurring nightmares. But she had noticed Emma's fearful reactions to unexpected sounds, doors slamming, men's voices raised in anger, the sharp barking of dogs in the distance. Something was terrifying this child, and Rosa suspected it had nothing to do with Michael Chun, despite what her daughter claimed in court documents. As dawn approached, Emma finally fell back into restless sleep, leaving Rosa to stare out the window at the empty streets and wonder what secrets her granddaughter carried in her innocent heart. The morning sun cast geometric patterns through the towering courthouse windows as Officer Danny Thompson guided Rex, his gentle German Shepherd therapy dog, through the polished marble hallways of the Hamilton County Courthouse. Rex's nails clicked softly against the stone floors, a rhythmic sound that had become as familiar to Danny as his own heartbeat during their 5 years working together as a K-9 therapy team. At 4 years old, Rex possessed the rare combination of intelligence, gentleness, and intuitive understanding that made him perfect for comforting traumatized children during their most vulnerable moments in the justice system. Danny, a 15-year veteran of the police force with kind blue eyes and prematurely gray hair, had originally trained Rex for traditional police work, drug detection, and criminal apprehension. But Rex's extraordinary empathy and calm demeanor had quickly revealed a different calling. Children who wouldn't speak to psychologists would whisper their secrets to Rex's soft ears. Victims who couldn't face their attackers in court found courage when Rex's warm presence reminded them they weren't alone. Today, Rex wore his special therapy vest, royal blue with Comfort Dog, embroidered in white letters, that distinguished him from working police dogs, and immediately signaled his peaceful mission to everyone he encountered. "Good morning, Rex," whispered Janet Mills, the court's head social worker, as they passed her office. Rex's tail wagged gently in response, his brown eyes bright with the intelligence that had made him legendary among courthouse staff. Janet had worked with Rex on dozens of cases involving child witnesses, and she never ceased to be amazed by his ability to sense exactly when a child needed comfort. Some days, Rex would simply sit quietly nearby, providing silent support. Other days he would gently place his head on a crying child's lap, offering the kind of unconditional love that only animals could provide. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere crackled with tension that seemed to make the very air heavy and difficult to breathe. Spectators filled every available seat like an audience waiting for a gladiator match, their whispered conversations creating a low buzz of anticipation and judgment. The gallery had naturally divided into opposing camps. Sarah's supporters on the left side, Michael's much smaller group on the right, with an invisible but palpable barrier running down the center aisle that might as well have been electrified. With the hostility flowing between the two factions, Sarah's family dominated the left side of the courtroom with the overwhelming presence of a unified army. Her mother Rosa sat in the front row, her weathered hands clasped tightly around a rosary as she whispered prayers in Spanish for her granddaughter's safety. Beside her, Sarah's younger sister Maria glared across the aisle with the fierce protectiveness of an aunt who had watched Emma grow from a helpless infant into the precious toddler now caught in this legal nightmare. Behind them, cousins, family friends, and fellow nurses from Sarah's hospital formed a wall of support that sent a clear message. Sarah Chun was not fighting this battle alone. The right side of the courtroom painted a starkly different picture. Michael's support group consisted of only 3 people: his elderly father, who had driven 4 hours from his retirement community to witness his son's fight for custody; his younger brother James, who had taken time off from his teaching job to provide moral support; and Mrs. Patterson, Michael's former neighbor, who had watched him lovingly care for Emma during countless father-daughter weekends. The size difference between the two camps would have been comical if the stakes weren't so devastatingly high. It looked like David facing Goliath. If David had been stripped of his slingshot and forced to fight with only his bare hands and desperate love for his child. Judge Rodriguez entered the courtroom with the commanding presence of someone who had spent 2 decades separating truth from fiction in family disputes. Her black robes flowed behind her like wings as she took her place behind the imposing bench, her dark eyes immediately scanning the room to assess the emotional temperature of everyone present. At 58, Judge Rodriguez had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the undercurrents of family dysfunction, to spot the lies before they were spoken, and recognize genuine pain beneath layers of legal posturing. "This court is now in session," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of Solomon's wisdom and the authority of someone who held the power to forever change the lives of everyone in that room. The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, instantly silencing the nervous murmurs and shifting the zafting, collective attention to the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. Those doors opened with the solemnity of a church procession, and in walked the most important person in the entire legal proceeding, 3-year-old Emma Chun. She appeared impossibly small against the backdrop of the massive courtroom, her tiny hand gripping Dr. Martinez's with the desperation of someone clinging to a life preserver in stormy seas. Emma wore her favorite yellow dress dotted with tiny purple flowers, an outfit she had chosen that morning because the flowers reminded her of the garden behind her grandmother's house, where she felt safe and loved. Clutched against her chest was Peanuts, the gray stuffed elephant that had become her constant companion during the long months of family upheaval. Peanuts had absorbed countless tears, heard whispered confessions that no adult ears had been privileged to receive, and provided the kind of unconditional comfort that only a beloved toy could offer to a child whose world had been turned upside down by forces beyond her understanding. Every adult in that courtroom held their breath as Emma made her way toward the witness stand, their hearts collectively breaking at the sight of someone so young being forced to navigate the adult world of legal proceedings and life-altering decisions. Court reporters paused their flying fingers, bailiffs straightened their postures, and even the most hardened attorneys felt their professional detachment crack in the face of such innocent vulnerability. Rex, sensing the emotional weight of the moment from his position near the back of the courtroom, lifted his noble head and watched the small girl with the intuitive understanding that had made him invaluable in these proceedings. His therapy training told him that this child would need every ounce of comfort he could provide, though neither he nor anyone else in that courtroom could possibly anticipate the explosive revelation that Emma's innocent words would soon unleash upon their carefully constructed legal battle. Dr. Lisa Martinez's voice carried the gentle cadence of someone who had spent years learning how to speak to children in their own emotional language, each word carefully chosen to create safety rather than intimidation in the overwhelming courtroom environment. She knelt beside Emma's specially designed witness chair, which had been equipped with a bright blue booster seat and positioned at an angle that allowed the tiny witness to see friendly faces rather than the stern formality of the judge's bench. The court stenographer had paused her rapid-fire typing, understanding that children's testimonies required different rhythms than adult proceedings. "Can you tell me about your house, Emma?" Dr. Martinez asked with the warm smile that had helped hundreds of traumatized children find their voices in this very courtroom. She placed a collection of colorful building blocks and small dolls on the table beside Emma's chair, creating a miniature world where complex family dynamics could be safely explored through play, therapy techniques that had proven successful in even the most difficult cases. Emma's dark eyes, still rimmed with the exhaustion of another sleepless night, studied the toys with the serious concentration of someone much older than her 3 years. Her small fingers, barely big enough to grasp the wooden figures, picked up a doll with long black hair and a tiny blue dress. "This is Mommy," she announced with the pride of a child who loved showing off her knowledge to interested adults. The doll was clutched possessively against her chest, as if Emma needed to protect even the toy version of her mother from the hostile forces she sensed surrounding them. The courtroom leaned forward collectively, 24 adults hanging on every innocent word from this tiny witness who held the power to determine her own future. Sarah dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her heart breaking at hearing Emma's simple declaration of love, despite all the chaos that had torn their family apart. Even the court reporter resumed her typing, understanding that these seemingly innocent observations might prove crucial to the judge's final decision. Dr. Martinez waited patiently as Emma hesitated before selecting another figure. A male doll with brown hair, wearing miniature work clothes that resembled the construction gear Michael had worn during his years building other people's dreams. Emma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as she held up the second doll. "This is Daddy ... He's sad now." The words hung in the air like a child's prayer, innocent yet devastating in their simple honesty about the emotional reality she had observed but couldn't fully understand. Sarah's attorney, Rebecca Williams, exchanged meaningful glances with her client, interpreting Emma's comment as evidence of Michael's depression and emotional instability following his job loss. She scribbled notes frantically, already planning how to use this testimony to support their argument that Michael's mental state made him unfit for custody. Sarah herself bit her lip, torn between relief that Emma's words seemed to support her case and genuine sorrow that her daughter had witnessed Michael's very real struggle with unemployment and the subsequent dissolution of their marriage. Michael's hands clenched into fists beneath the defendant's table as he heard his 3-year-old daughter describe his emotional state with the devastating accuracy that only children possess. He wanted to call out across the courtroom, to explain that his sadness came from missing her, from fighting for the right to remain her father, from watching their family crumble, despite his desperate attempts to hold everything together. But court protocol demanded his silence, leaving him to suffer through his daughter's unintentionally damaging testimony. Dr. Martinez continued her gentle questioning, asking Emma about her daily routines, her favorite games, and the people who made her feel happy and safe. Emma's responses painted a picture of a child caught between two worlds: the structured visits with her father, where they built elaborate block towers and read picture books until she fell asleep in his arms, and the increasingly chaotic environment at her mother's apartment, where unnamed tensions created an atmosphere of anxiety that Emma could sense but not articulate. But something strange began to happen when Dr. Martinez asked about times when Emma felt scared or worried. The child's demeanor shifted subtly, her small body becoming more rigid in the booster seat, her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom, as if searching for hidden threats. Her voice dropped to the barely audible whisper that children use when discussing things they instinctively know they shouldn't mention in front of adults. "Sometimes there's loud noises," Emma said, her tiny fingers twisting the fabric of her yellow dress into worried knots. "Really loud noises that make me hide under my bed?" Dr. Martinez leaned closer, her professional instincts recognizing the signs of a child processing traumatic memories. "Can you tell me about these noises, sweetheart?" Emma's gaze wandered across the courtroom, taking in the sea of adult faces watching her every movement, before settling on something in the back corner that seemed to capture her complete attention. There, sitting with the patient stillness of a professional therapy animal, was Rex. Officer Danny Thompson had positioned himself and his canine partner in the least intrusive spot possible, but Rex's gentle presence was unmistakably that of a German Shepherd, the same breed that had been terrorizing Emma in ways that no adult in that courtroom yet understood. Emma's voice became even smaller as she pointed toward Rex with a trembling finger. "The doggy makes loud noises," she whispered, her words causing a ripple of confusion throughout the courtroom. Rex sat perfectly motionless, his therapy training keeping him calm despite the unexpected attention, his brown eyes reflecting nothing but the gentle intelligence that had made him beloved by every child witness he had comforted. Michael's attorney, David Park, looked genuinely puzzled as he shuffled through his case files, finding no mention of any dog in any of the documents related to this custody dispute. There had been no testimony about pets, no evidence presented regarding animals of any kind, no previous indication that dogs played any role in the Chun family dynamics. Yet here was Emma, clearly distressed by the sight of Rex, speaking about loud canine noises that seemed to trigger memories of fear and hiding. Sarah's face had gone completely white, the color draining from her features like water from a broken dam. Her hands gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table so tightly that her knuckles stood out like mountain peaks beneath her olive skin. She shot a panicked glance toward her attorney, her eyes wide with the terror of someone who realized that carefully constructed plans were beginning to unravel with each innocent word from her daughter's lips. Judge Rodriguez made careful notes, her experienced mind recognizing that this unexpected development might be the key to understanding the true source of trauma in this little girl's life, though she couldn't yet imagine how a gentle therapy dog could possibly be connected to the domestic violence allegations that had brought this family before her court. The courtroom had fallen into that peculiar kind of silence that only exists in moments of extreme tension. The kind of quiet where every breath becomes audible, every shifting fabric sounds like thunder, and the very air seems to hold its breath waiting for something momentous to occur. Dr. Martinez continued her gentle questioning, but Emma's attention had become completely fixated on the back corner of the courtroom, where Rex sat with Officer Thompson, her small body growing increasingly agitated with each passing second. Emma's breathing had become shallow and rapid, the telltale signs of a child experiencing anxiety that Dr. Martinez recognized immediately from her years of working with traumatized witnesses. The 3-year-old's tiny hands gripped the arms of her booster seat so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and her legs began swinging nervously beneath the witness table, a behavior that child psychologists knew indicated severe emotional distress in young children. "Emma, sweetheart, are you feeling okay?" Dr. Martinez asked softly, her professional instincts screaming that something significant was about to happen. She followed Emma's gaze to Rex, who remained perfectly still in his position near the back wall, his therapy vest clearly visible, and his demeanor radiating the calm professionalism that had made him invaluable in situations exactly like this one. But Emma wasn't seeing Rex the therapy dog, who had comforted dozens of frightened children. In her 3-year-old mind, traumatized by months of terror that no adult had yet discovered, she was seeing Kaiser, Derek's 90-pound German shepherd, whose aggressive snarling and barely controlled violence had taught her to associate dogs of this breed with danger, chaos, and the kind of fear that made her wet her bed and wake up screaming in the middle of the night. The transformation in Emma's behavior was sudden and dramatic. She pushed herself up from her seated position with the jerky movements of someone responding to a perceived threat, her yellow dress with its innocent purple flowers creating a stark contrast to the terror now radiating from her small frame. Her stuffed elephant, Peanuts, fell to the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. "Emma?" Dr. Martinez reached out instinctively, but the little girl was beyond hearing adult voices of comfort and reassurance. Her entire world had narrowed to the sight of what she perceived as the scary doggy that had haunted her nightmares and turned her mother's apartment into a battlefield of shouting, breaking glass, and threatening growls that promised violence to anyone who displeased Derek Williams. Then, in a moment that would be replayed in the minds of everyone present for years to come, Emma's small arm shot out like an arrow, her tiny finger pointing directly at Rex with the unwavering accuracy of a child who had learned to identify danger from across a room. Her voice, which had been barely above a whisper throughout her testimony, suddenly rang out across the courtroom with crystal clarity that cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "Bad doggy." The 2 words hit the courtroom like a physical force, creating a shockwave of confusion and stunned silence that rippled through every person present. Judge Rodriguez's pen stopped moving across her notepad. The court stenographer's fingers froze above her keys. Bailiffs straightened to attention, unsure whether they were witnessing a breakdown or a breakthrough. In the gallery, family members leaned forward in their seats, straining to understand what they had just witnessed. Officer Danny Thompson's face registered complete bewilderment as he looked down at Rex, whose therapy record was spotless and whose gentle nature had never been questioned in 5 years of working with traumatized children. Rex himself seemed to sense the attention, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting confusion at being the object of such intense focus, his tail giving a small, uncertain wag as if trying to understand why the atmosphere in the room had suddenly become charged with tension. "Bad doggy. Bad doggy," Emma repeated, her voice growing stronger and more insistent with each repetition, her small body trembling with the force of emotions she couldn't fully articulate, but felt with every fiber of her being. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, as months of suppressed terror came pouring out in this unexpected moment of recognition and release. Dr. Martinez moved quickly to comfort Emma, her training kicking in as she recognized the signs of a child reliving traumatic experiences. But even as she wrapped her arms around the sobbing toddler, her mind was racing with questions that had no immediate answers. Why was Emma terrified of a therapy dog who had never shown aggression toward any child? What had caused this reaction? And most importantly, what did this reveal about the true source of trauma in Emma's young life? Sarah Chun's reaction was perhaps the most telling of all. Her face had gone beyond pale to ashen, the color of someone who had just seen their worst nightmare beginning to unfold in real time. Her hands shook so violently that she had to press them flat against the table to keep them steady, and her breathing had become rapid and shallow, the physical symptoms of someone in the grip of panic. She shot desperate glances toward her attorney, toward the exit doors, toward anywhere that might offer escape from the revelation that was beginning to dawn on the more perceptive observers in the courtroom. Michael Chun sat in stunned silence, his construction worker's hands gripping the edge of the defendant's table as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed began clicking into place in his mind. His daughter's nightmares about dogs that he had attributed to childhood fears, her regression in potty training and sleep patterns that had coincided with the custody battle, the way she sometimes flinched at unexpected sounds or male voices raised in anything louder than conversational tones. Judge Rodriguez, whose 2 decades on the family court bench had taught her to recognize pivotal moments in legal proceedings, set down her pen and leaned forward slightly, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of the scene unfolding before her. She had seen children break down during testimony before, but this felt different. This felt like a 3-year-old was trying to tell them something crucial that all the adults had missed. Rebecca Williams, Sarah's attorney, felt the ground, shifting beneath her carefully constructed case like quicksand swallowing everything she had built. Every legal strategy, every piece of evidence, every argument she had prepared was suddenly called into question by 2 words from a toddler who couldn't even spell her own name yet. The courtroom remained frozen in this moment of suspended time, everyone sensing that Emma's outburst had just changed everything, but not yet understanding how or why, while the little girl continued to point at the innocent therapy dog and repeat the words that would ultimately expose the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Judge Rodriguez's chambers felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos that had erupted in the courtroom moments before. The office, lined with law books and decorated with family photos that reminded her daily why she had dedicated her life to protecting children, now served as an emergency triage center where truth would finally emerge from the wreckage of lies and confusion. Emma sat curled in Dr. Martinez's lap on the leather sofa, her small body still trembling from the emotional outburst that had stunned everyone present, while both attorneys flanked them like sentries guarding opposing armies. Dr. Martinez had transformed into full crisis intervention mode, her voice taking on the special tone she reserved for children experiencing severe trauma responses. She arranged her collection of therapy toys on the coffee table with practiced precision. Miniature houses, family figures, and most importantly, several toy dogs of different breeds and sizes that would help Emma distinguish between her fears and reality. "Tell me about the doggy you don't like, sweetheart," Dr. Martinez coaxed gently, her experienced hands moving slowly as she placed a toy German Shepherd among the other animals. Emma's reaction was immediate and visceral. She recoiled as if the plastic figure could bite her, pressing herself deeper into Dr. Martinez's protective embrace while pointing at the toy with the same terror she had shown toward Rex in the thin courtroom. "He's big and scary." Emma's voice carried the primal fear of a child who had learned that certain sounds meant danger was coming. "He barks really loud and breaks things." Her small hands moved frantically through the air, demonstrating the chaos she had witnessed. Objects flying, furniture overturning, the kind of violence that no 3-year-old should ever have to process or remember. Rebecca Williams felt her carefully constructed case crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane as she realized her client had concealed crucial information that would have changed every aspect of their legal strategy. Sarah Chorn had painted herself as a protective mother fleeing from an abusive ex-husband, when the reality was far more complex and damaging to her credibility. Through patient questioning that relied on play therapy techniques perfected over years of working with traumatized children, Dr. Martinez began to uncover a horrifying picture that had been hidden beneath layers of adult deception and legal maneuvering. Emma picked up different toy figures as she told her story, her child's logic making connections that the adults had missed completely. "Derek yells at the doggy, and the doggy gets really mad," Emma explained, acting out the scene. With toys that represented the violence she had witnessed in what should have been the safety of her own home. She made the toy dog knock over miniature furniture while moving the people figures away from the chaos, recreating the moments when she had learned to hide under her bed or in her closet when Derek Williams lost control of both his temper and his aggressive German Shepherd named Kaiser. The revelation struck the room like lightning, illuminating a dark landscape. Sarah had never mentioned any boyfriend in her court filings, testimonies, or sworn affidavits. According to every legal document in the case, she was a single mother focused solely on protecting her daughter from Michael's alleged instability and violence. The existence of Derek Williams, and more importantly, his presence in Emma's daily life, changed everything about the custody dispute. Judge Rodriguez's eyes blazed with the righteous anger of someone who had spent decades fighting for children's welfare, only to discover that a mother had potentially exposed her daughter to the very danger she claimed to be escaping. Her pen moved rapidly across her notepad as Emma continued her innocent testimony, each revelation more damaging than the last to Sarah's credibility and fitness as a custodial parent. "Sometimes Derek throws things and Mommy cries," Emma continued, her 3-year-old vocabulary struggling to describe domestic violence that would have challenged adult witnesses to articulate. She arranged the toy figures to show how the adults would argue while the scary dog barked and threatened, creating an atmosphere of chaos and fear that had become Emma's normal daily environment. David Park, Michael's public defender, felt vindication, mixed with heartbreak, as he realized his client had been falsely accused while his daughter was actually living in the dangerous situation that Sarah had claimed to be fleeing. Every piece of evidence that had seemed to support Sarah's case now appeared in a different light. The destruction in photographs could have been caused by Derek's violence rather than Michael's alleged instability, and Emma's behavioral problems stemmed from witnessing Derek's abuse rather than Michael's supposed emotional issues. Dr. Martinez continued her careful questioning, understanding that Emma's testimony was not just revealing the truth about this custody case, but potentially uncovering criminal behavior that would require immediate intervention from Child Protective Services. "Where do you go when Derek and the doggy get angry?" she asked gently, preparing herself for answers that would likely break her heart. "I hide under my bed," Emma whispered, demonstrating with the toy figures how she would crawl into small spaces and wait for the violence to stop. "Sometimes I hide in the closet with my clothes, and I have to be really quiet so the doggy doesn't find me." The image of a 3-year-old teaching herself survival techniques in her own home brought tears to Dr. Martinez's eyes, despite her professional training. Sarah Chun, confronted with the undeniable evidence emerging from her daughter's innocent testimony, finally began to crack under the weight of months of deception and fear. Her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs as she realized that her attempts to hide Derek's presence in their lives had backfired spectacularly, exposing her as either a liar or an enabler of child endangerment, possibly both. Judge Rodriguez called for an immediate recess to process the implications of Emma's revelations, understanding that this case had just transformed from a routine custody dispute into a potential criminal investigation involving domestic violence, child endangerment, and perjury. The innocent words of a 3-year-old had accomplished what months of legal maneuvering and adult testimony had failed to achieve. They had revealed the truth about who was really putting Emma Chun in danger. Emma continued playing with the therapy toys, unaware that her brave honesty had just saved her from a situation that could have escalated into tragedy, while the adults around her scrambled to understand how they had all missed the signs of a child living in terror of a man and his dog who weren't even supposed to exist in the context of this legal battle. 6 months later, the same courtroom that had witnessed Emma's traumatic testimony now hosted a scene of healing and hope that Judge Maria Rodriguez would remember as one of the most rewarding moments in her 23-year career. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed brighter somehow, illuminating a family that had been torn apart by deception and violence, but was now slowly rebuilding itself on foundations of truth, forgiveness, and genuine love for a little girl who deserved nothing less than complete protection and happiness. Emma Chun, now 3.5 years old, and visibly more confident than the frightened child who had pointed at Rex 6 months earlier, sat comfortably on her father, Michael's lap, her legs swinging freely as she observed the familiar courtroom, with curious eyes rather than the terror that had once consumed her. She wore a bright red dress with white polka dots, a gift from her grandmother Rosa, who had become an unexpected bridge between Michael and Sarah as they learned to co-parent despite the trauma they had all endured. The transformation in Emma was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire case's resolution. Dr. Lisa Martinez, who continued working with Emma through play therapy sessions twice weekly, had documented the child's progress in reports that read like miracle stories. The nightmares that had plagued Emma for months had gradually faded as Derek Williams disappeared from her life forever. Her regression in potty training and speech development had reversed completely, and she had begun displaying the natural curiosity and joy that should characterize any healthy 3-year-old's daily experience. "Daddy, can I pet the nice doggy now?" Emma asked with the innocent directness that had once exposed the truth about her hidden trauma. Her small finger pointed toward Rex, who sat in his familiar position near the back of the courtroom with Officer Danny Thompson, but this time her gesture carried excitement rather than fear. The months of therapy had helped Emma understand the difference between Rex, the gentle therapy dog who helped scared children feel safe, and Kaiser, Derek's weapon of intimidation, who had terrorized her in ways that still required ongoing professional support to fully process. Officer Thompson beamed with pride as he led Rex forward, the German shepherd's tail wagging with the joy of a dog who lived to comfort children and had waited patiently for Emma to overcome her trauma enough to accept his friendship. Rex approached. Slowly, his therapy training guiding him to let Emma set the pace of their interaction, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting the gentle soul that had made him legendary among courthouse staff for his ability to heal young hearts. Emma's tiny hands, which had once trembled at the sight of any large dog, now stroked Rex's soft fur with wonder and delight. "Good doggy," she whispered, the two words carrying the weight of her complete transformation from victim to survivor. "You help scared kids feel better, don't you?" Rex's tail wagged faster, as if he understood that this moment represented not just Emma's healing but vindication of his own mission to bring comfort to those who needed it most. Sarah Chun watched this interaction from a nearby chair, not as an adversary in a bitter custody battle, but as a mother who had finally escaped the prison of Derek Williams's control and was learning to rebuild her relationship with both her daughter and her ex-husband. The past 6 months had been the most challenging period of her life, involving intensive domestic violence counseling, anger management therapy, and the humbling process of acknowledging the damage her choices had caused to everyone she claimed to love. Derek Williams was serving an 18-month sentence in the county correctional facility, his time extended by violations of probation and new charges that had emerged as other victims found the courage to come forward after his arrest. His dangerous German Shepherd Kaiser had been placed in a specialized rehabilitation facility where experts worked with animals that had been trained for aggression, though the consensus among professionals was that Kaiser's behavioral conditioning might be too severe to ever safely reverse. Sarah's journey toward redemption had begun with a complete confession to authorities about the full extent of Derek's abuse and manipulation. She had provided detailed testimony that helped prosecutors build an airtight case against him, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to terrorize another woman or child. Her cooperation had been noted by Judge Rodriguez during sentencing hearings, though Sarah understood that legal mercy did not erase the moral responsibility she carried for exposing Emma to such danger. "I failed my daughter in the worst possible way," Sarah had confessed during one of her mandatory counseling sessions with the court-appointed therapist. "I was so focused on escaping Derek that I put Emma in even greater danger by trying to hide the truth. Michael was never the threat. I was, because I brought Derek into our lives and then lied about it to everyone who could have helped us." Michael Chun had surprised everyone, including himself, by becoming an advocate for Sarah's rehabilitation rather than seeking maximum punishment for her deception. His construction worker's practical wisdom had helped him understand that Sarah had been another victim of Derek's manipulation, and that Emma's best interests were served by having two parents who could eventually work together rather than one parent destroyed by guilt and legal consequences. "Emma needs her mother," Michael had told Judge Rodriguez during the final custody modification hearing. "Sarah made terrible choices, but she made them out of fear, not malice. With proper support and supervision, she can learn to be the mother Emma deserves." His generosity had been rewarded with a custody arrangement that gave him primary placement while allowing Sarah graduated visitation rights as she completed her court-mandated programs. The family therapy sessions that Michael and Sarah attended with Emma had been awkward at first, filled with the tension of people learning to trust each other again after months of legal warfare. But gradually, as Emma's natural resilience began to shine through her trauma, her parents found themselves united by their shared commitment to her healing and happiness rather than divided by their past mistakes and mutual pain. Dr. Martinez continued documenting Emma's progress, noting in her files that the little girl had begun asking questions about the scary time, with the maturity of someone processing difficult experiences rather than being overwhelmed by them. Emma understood, in the simple terms appropriate for her age, that some adults make bad choices that hurt children, but that the good adults in her life, Daddy, Mommy, Grandma Rosa, and even nice doggies like Rex, would always work together to keep her safe. As the courthouse session concluded, and Emma skipped between her parents toward the exit, her laughter echoing through the marble corridors like music, Judge Rodriguez reflected on how a 3-year-old's innocent honesty had saved not just herself, but potentially countless other victims who might have suffered if Derek Williams had remained free to continue his pattern of abuse and intimidation. Sometimes justice came from the most unexpected sources. In this case, a tiny girl who had simply known the difference between a bad doggy and a good one, and who had possessed the courage to speak that truth even when the adults around her had lost their way in webs of deception, fear, and misguided protection. 6 months later, the same courtroom that had witnessed Emma's traumatic testimony now hosted a scene of healing and hope that Judge Maria Rodriguez would remember as one of the most rewarding moments in her 23-year career. The morning, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, seemed brighter somehow, illuminating a family that had been torn apart by deception and violence, but was now slowly rebuilding itself on foundations of truth, forgiveness, and genuine love for a little girl who deserved nothing less than complete protection and happiness. Emma Chun, now 3.5 years old, and visibly more confident than the frightened child who had pointed at Rex 6 months earlier, sat comfortably on her father, Michael's lap, her legs swinging freely as she observed the familiar courtroom, with curious eyes rather than the terror that had once consumed her. She wore a bright red dress with white polka dots, a gift from her grandmother Rosa, who had become an unexpected bridge between Michael and Sarah as they learned to co-parent despite the trauma they had all endured. The transformation in Emma was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire case's resolution. Dr. Lisa Martinez, who continued working with Emma through play therapy sessions twice weekly, had documented the child's progress in reports that read like miracle stories. The nightmares that had plagued Emma for months had gradually faded as Derek Williams disappeared from her life forever. Her regression in potty training and speech development had reversed completely, and she had begun displaying the natural curiosity and joy that should characterize any healthy 3-year-old's daily experience. "Daddy, can I pet the nice doggy now?" Emma asked with the innocent directness that had once exposed the truth about her hidden trauma. Her small finger pointed toward Rex, who sat in his familiar position near the back of the courtroom with Officer Danny Thompson, but this time her gesture carried excitement rather than fear. The months of therapy had helped Emma understand the difference between Rex, the gentle therapy dog who helped scared children feel safe, and Kaiser, Derek's weapon of intimidation, who had terrorized her in ways that still required ongoing professional support to fully process. Officer Thompson beamed with pride as he led Rex forward, the German shepherd's tail wagging with the joy of a dog who lived to comfort children and had waited patiently for Emma to overcome her trauma enough to accept his friendship. Rex approached slowly, his therapy training guiding him to let Emma set the pace of their interaction, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting the gentle soul that had made him legendary among courthouse staff for his ability to heal young hearts. Emma's tiny hands, which had once trembled at the sight of any large dog, now stroked Rex's soft fur with wonder and delight. "Good doggy," she whispered, the 2 words carrying the weight of her complete transformation from victim to survivor. "You help scared kids feel better, don't you?" Rex's tail wagged faster, as if he understood that this moment represented not just Emma's healing but vindication of his own mission to bring comfort to those who needed it most. Sarah Chun watched this interaction from a nearby chair, not as an adversary in a bitter custody battle, but as a mother who had finally escaped the prison of Derek Williams's control and was learning to rebuild her relationship with both her daughter and her ex-husband. The past 6 months had been the most challenging period of her life, involving intensive domestic violence counseling, anger management therapy, and the humbling process of acknowledging the damage her choices had caused to everyone she claimed. to love. Derek Williams was serving an 18-month sentence in the county correctional facility. His time extended by violations of probation and new charges that had emerged as other victims found the courage to come forward after his arrest. His dangerous German Shepherd Kaiser had been placed in a specialized rehabilitation facility where experts worked with animals that had been trained for aggression, though the consensus among professionals was that Kaiser's behavioral conditioning might be too severe to ever safely reverse. Sarah's journey toward redemption had begun with a complete confession to authorities about the full extent of Derek's abuse and manipulation. She had provided detailed testimony that helped prosecutors build an airtight case against him, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to terrorize another woman or child. Her cooperation had been noted by Judge Rodriguez during sentencing hearings, though Sarah understood that legal mercy did not erase the moral responsibility she carried for exposing Emma to such danger. "I failed my daughter in the worst possible way," Sarah had confessed during one of her mandatory counseling sessions with the court-appointed therapist. "I was so focused on escaping Derek that I put Emma in even greater danger by trying to hide the truth. Michael was never the threat. I was, because I brought Derek into our lives and then lied about it to everyone who could have helped us." Michael Chun had surprised everyone, including himself, by becoming an advocate for Sarah's rehabilitation rather than seeking maximum punishment for her deception. His construction worker's practical wisdom had helped him understand that Sarah had been another victim of Derek's manipulation, and that Emma's best interests were served by having two parents who could eventually work together rather than one parent destroyed by guilt and legal consequences. "Emma needs her mother," Michael had told Judge Rodriguez during the final custody modification hearing. "Sarah made terrible choices, but she made them out of fear, not malice. With proper support and supervision, she can learn to be the mother Emma deserves." His generosity had been rewarded with a custody arrangement that gave him primary placement while allowing Sarah graduated visitation rights as she completed her court-mandated programs. The family therapy sessions that Michael and Sarah attended with Emma had been awkward at first, filled with the tension of people learning to trust each other again after months of legal warfare. But gradually, as Emma's natural resilience began to shine through her trauma, her parents found themselves united by their shared commitment to her healing and happiness rather than divided by their past mistakes and mutual pain. Dr. Martinez continued documenting Emma's progress, noting in her files that the little girl had begun asking questions about the scary time, with the maturity of someone processing difficult experiences rather than being overwhelmed by them. Emma understood, in the simple terms appropriate for her age, that some adults make bad choices that hurt children, but that the good adults in her life, Daddy, Mommy, Grandma Rosa, and even nice doggies like Rex, would always work together to keep her safe. As the courthouse session concluded, and Emma skipped between her parents toward the exit, her laughter echoing through the marble corridors like music, Judge Rodriguez reflected on how a 3-year-old's innocent honesty had saved not just herself, but potentially countless other victims who might have suffered if Derek Williams had remained free to continue his pattern of abuse and intimidation. Sometimes justice came from the most unexpected sources. In this case, a tiny girl who had simply known the difference between a bad doggy and a good one, and who had possessed the courage to speak that truth even when the adults around her had lost their way in webs of deception, fear, and misguided protection.